The bell has rung. So get seated and join Elementary Schooled for today's interview.
I would like to give a special thanks to each and every sponsor for this podcast. Thank you, Bountiful Mazda, Complete Landscapes, IXL Learning Program, SRW, Security Training and Consulting, Taylor Learning Center, Utah Entity Services, and Viva Agree. Thank you. Charri, that it took 6 months to get this interview. So you are in high demand and also very busy in what you do. But today we're talking about what happens when a teacher or anyone really calls Child Protective Services. What happens when that call is made? What is the process that happens after that phone call? And so I really appreciate your willingness to share your time and your expertise and knowledge with us today as the Assistant Director, is that right, for the state of Utah with the Division of Child and Family Services. Did I get that right?
That is correct, yes.
Your job has got to be so tough.
I'm just pleased that there are folks who are willing to reach out and who want to learn more. I can't think of a more precious and vulnerable population than our kiddos. And
That's
so
right.
anyone that takes an interest in that, I think, is very important and definitely worth the time. So thank you for having me here.
Thank you, Charri. Charri Brummer. Brummer like drummer. Only a teacher would say that, right? Will you introduce yourself, Charri?
I sure will. As you said, I'm Charri Brummer, and I am the Assistant Director for the Utah Division of Child and Family Services, which most people know as DCFS.
Yes.
For the most part. And I've actually worked with DCFS for, I think it's been about 29 and a half years.
Wow, that's
So
substantial.
yeah. So I started off my career almost 30 years ago, and that was actually as a frontline caseworker in one of our 5 geographic regions that we're broken into here in Utah. And then I've been here in this role for about 17 years as the Assistant Director. I also am a licensed clinical social worker. And just a fun little fact I'll share is just when I got this job, I originally planned I was going to do child welfare for 2 years, 2 years max, and then I planned to move on, whether to work in a facility or something like that. And what sort of happened in that 2 years was kind of it's kind of magical. Um, and what I mean by that is just the love and the respect that you develop for the families that you work with, and that includes the adults and the children, is just kind of what keeps you coming back and coming back. And you have an opportunity to get involved in the life of a child and a family at, frankly, a really vulnerable time on their part. And it's sort of an honor to be able to be there and to share with them and to sort of help them to work past some of the difficulties and the challenges and try to kind of leave them in a better place than when they started. And so it was just that love and that working with them as well as my colleagues. I have always been extremely fortunate to work with incredible people within the division as well, who not unlike teachers are not doing it for fame and fortune, and we're doing it because we care. And that there is just sort of a devotion there that's really hard to even put into words. And so I have stayed here, as you can see, here I am 30 years later, and just trying to sort of do what I can to help families. I no longer work on the front line anymore, but in my position, I get to work a lot with the legislature and the administrators, and so I'm really grateful for my opportunity to be here.
Thank you. I felt really warm inside with just everything you were saying, because I think for us on the outside of what you do, I think we view your job as extremely challenging, and I'm sure it is. But I love that you are saying that it's an honor and that you keep coming back to the essence of life, which is love. And that just has that human nature quality that we all need to share with each other. And that's why I'm still in
Right.
education. Is
Mhm.
it is challenging, and more challenging probably than it's ever been, but I come back to these families and these kids, and that you really
Yeah.
can make a difference. And so it is a privilege. And so thank you. You're speaking my love language here. So
You're gonna make me cry up
and it's an
and
emotional, and I think it's good for listeners and viewers to know that there are, we get a lot of negativity in the news, but there are very loving people that just want to nurture and help behind the
Mhm.
scenes. And I hear that from what you're saying. And so thank you so much for sharing that. And that kind of starts us off on the right. No, before I ask your the first just kind of dive in question, I do want to just mention, I'm sure we're probably not different than any other state where we have had really disturbing stories in the news lately. And is it your opinion, Charri, that these stories have always been happening, but now there's just more awareness, and now with social media and all the different ways we can find out news, that we're just learning of it more? Or do you think that the stories are more intense? What's your feeling on that?
No, that's a difficult question to answer.
Yeah.
Um, Anytime a child is hurt, it's a tragedy.
Yeah.
And, our hearts always go out to the child, of course, to the families, to anybody that's involved in that kind of situation. And it's happens in all states, so it isn't just Utah. And it's really hard to say. Is it because word is out there of who to contact if you suspect abuse or neglect? Is it because it's happening more? I don't think we know the answer to that. I think the important takeaway from that is to say, as a person or a citizen, I need to keep my eyes open, and I need to be a safe person that both children and adults can engage with. And if they're struggling, I'm someone they can come to, and I know resources. I know how to report abuse and neglect. I know how to help families, even if it's something as simple as a referral to a food bank,
Hmm.
just different things like that. Because having eyes and ears and being a caring person, whether you're an educator, whether you work at a grocery store, whether you're a CPS worker for DCFS, we all sort of have that, I think, that desire to protect our community, which includes the children and families. Yeah,
Thank you. I have wondered about that, and that's a great answer. Um, I want to say that since we're talking about what happens when we do feel like we need to make that phone call to DCFS, what advice can you give for all of us? Even though our many of our listeners are educators, we have a lot of
yeah.
parents that listen, and just general public. What advice can you give about how to know when that phone call, and I will admit, as a teacher, in the times I've had to do it, which is probably only a handful of times,
Yeah.
do have some trepidation. Like, I don't want to make, it's all the same things you hear. I don't want to make things worse for the child. I don't know for certain, but for me, I can only say in my experience that that burning has kind of come where it won't leave my mind. And now those are the
Absolutely.
times where I have known. But what would you say? What is your best advice?
Yeah, I appreciate you asking such an important question. And I guess my response is kind of twofold. Um, so with DCFS, we kind of have a couple of goals. One is to strengthen families so that they can keep their own children safe, because no one wants to have us in their lives forever. Um, and so I think that we want to strengthen those families, but also we want to keep children safe in their own homes whenever we possibly can. And so kind of part of meeting those goals is sort of knowing, well, when should I get involved, or when should I involve others? And so it, there's sort of this responsibility of reporting suspected abuse or neglect for anybody. And I'll chat about that kind of first, and then I can kind of comment
Sure.
more on other important information related to sort of that overall community support and prevention piece. But I think sometimes people mistakenly think they need to be able to prove abuse or neglect has actually happened before they call us. and that is not the case. To be able to assess and sort of determine if abuse and neglect have occurred is our role. And so our hotline that we have available, you can call us, we can take your report, and then our professionals are trained that they can determine if it does meet the criteria to, to look deeper into a situation where a child might need help. And I think my biggest piece of advice would be to go ahead and call, even if you're not sure, because we'd rather respond to your questions than risk a child being
Suffering.
abused or neglected or underreporting. Yeah,
Absolutely.
exactly. And in truth, I mean, educators, all licensed personnel, and basically anybody are mandatory reporters here in the state of Utah. So
Right.
that basically means if you think a child is being abused or neglected, then you should report your concerns to DCFS.
You're required to, yes.
Or
Yeah.
law enforcement, one or the other, and then let us kind of take it from there.
Who answers those calls? I have wondered that. Who is the
Yeah,
person on the other
we
line?
actually, no, we actually have an intake office that is available. It's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and we have trained professionals who can answer those questions, who can hear what it is that you have to say. And they're trained to actually ask you questions, because sometimes when you call into DCFS, you may not know exactly, what should I say? I don't want to look like I am trying to, cause trouble for a family. What if I'm suspecting something that isn't really there? Or like you said, am I going to cause more damage, or, that kind of thing? And so when they do call, what they can kind of expect is that you'll get asked questions, you'll be greeted by, a trained professional, and sort of be able to get that information from you. Um, the only information we absolutely have to have is we have to know the identity of the child or the alleged victim.
Just the
That
name.
just means a way that we can find the child and specifically know who they are. And then where to find them, how to find them. So that sometimes it does mean, is it a school? Is it a home? Where is it? But if we know who it is that you're calling about, the means to find them, and then some sort of allegation of abuse or neglect or even dependency. So basically, what's happened or what's happening, what's causing you suspicion that this child might be being abused or neglected, the harm or maybe some threatened harm to the child. And then we can decide, if does that rise to the threshold of what is considered abuse or neglect, according to the law. So those are really just those three basic things is all you need to have when you call, and that's who you'll speak with will be a trained intake worker.
And they do. Will you explain what happens when a person does make that call? And what kind of intervention or what happens next?
Okay, I think that's also a great question, and one that I think can sometimes be difficult for the referent or the person that's calling in, because they may not be privy to know what happens beyond that call. And
Exactly.
I think that, having been a referent myself, on occasion, as well as working with, numerous referents through the years, I think that's probably the single biggest sort of um, punch in the gut a little bit, if I can say, is knowing you've done your part, you've called it in, but then also knowing that there's a certain level of confidentiality that has to be maintained for that family. And
Right.
so just like your name is going to be protected as a referent, we're not going to give it to the family. So you can either call in as anonymous, or you can actually provide your name and contact information if you want a caseworker to contact you at a later date to gather more information or kind of go over it with you, but also to let you know when the case closes. But you're not going to get a copy of the report. You're not going to know what we found.
Right.
And you're seeing, especially educators, you're seeing these kiddos every single day. And you may have no idea if there are services in the home, if a court is involved, if the child has been, temporarily placed elsewhere. And so I think that can be a little bit daunting and a little bit tough, because it's a very emotional call to make.
Yeah. What's
What?
been upsetting for me is twice this has happened in, over the span of many years, but the family ends up moving or changing schools. And then you
Can
just feel so
happen.
heartbroken, like, oh, did I get too close to the situation? Did they
Can happen.
know it was me? And then they just left. And then you just feel kind of sick about, I hope that
Mhm.
child is okay. And you don't necessarily know, but I think what you're saying is take heart in knowing that we do what we can to make sure
Absolutely.
that there's follow through on the other end. And I think
Absolutely.
people want to know what does that follow through look like, and is it a
Mhm.
lot different than it used to be?
I think it is important for people to understand that once we go out into a home, we may find something. We might not find something. And that we understand your frustration at not being able to know. If we are involved with a family and we have some sort of intervention, which could be everything from, just working with them in the home, helping, to get resources for them, monitoring sort of progress on some of those, parenting skills and all sorts of things when you're working with a family too, which might be, some mental health issues. It could be drug use and abuse. I mean, just different things. And you may not have known any of that when you first called it in. You may have had one isolated incident, or maybe you did know about a lot of
Mhm.
different things. But there are just interventions are very specific to the family, because it's the family that knows themselves best. And I think that one of the things that we have realized through the years is that the family is their own expert, and that when you come in, that family voice and being able to create a system for them, um, and a team that's surrounding them, both formal supports and informal supports, is really important to be able to help a family get through this and establish some of those protective factors, and taking into consideration things like, the developmental needs of the kids and the connections that people have. There's just so much that goes into it. And I think that schools and educators, are really an important piece of that. And oftentimes, and I don't know if you've had this opportunity, but oftentimes a school teacher or a school counselor, may be part of what we call our child and family team. And
Mhm.
if that is the case and they have been identified, then they'll be brought in from the very beginning. There are meetings that occur to sort of set up, okay, what are the goals? What are we looking for? What are the strengths here? What are the needs of the family? How do we, put these things into place so that this child and this family can be successful? We can keep the child safely at home, but not jeopardize safety, while we're doing it, or bring the child back home in the case that if they, have to be temporarily removed, we want to work towards reunification. So oftentimes teachers will be part of that. I think in answer to your question, what have we, how have things changed, or what have we kind of, um, improvements, or sort of
Mhm. Yeah,
what have we
updates or
looked
improvements
to?
over the
Yeah.
yeah.
And I think a lot of the first thing again is the inclusion of family voice. And then we also do, have a lot of various assessments that have come into play through the years. And we're always looking for, you want to use things which may be similar with education, I don't know, but evidence-based tools or evidence-informed, um, tools to be able to sort of help us measure, are children safe at home? And then being able to get the right, access to resources and, in-home support, just to strengthen that family and sort of enable them to safely parent. And so we use a couple different tools, and I won't take up too much time and mention them all, but we do use, structured decision making tool, and that helps us with safety and risk as well as sort of the family functioning,
Mhm.
um, which is, part of our, tool called the Utah Family and Children Engagement Tool. We refer to it as the UFACET. And we basically use these tools to sort of, work with the families in assessing, okay, what are these needs? Let's identify the services that are going to meet these needs. So, for example, our safety assessment itself is used to really identify, okay, what are the immediate threats of like serious harm to a child, or what actions, interventions are sort of necessary to protect that child from whatever that harm is. And then kind of the actions or, interventions, like I say, it could be an in-home intervention, or to, temporarily mitigate the threat to, remove the child from the home or whatnot. But it kind of lets us know what are those immediate threats or serious harm. And then we have our risk assessment, which is more identifying kind of the level of risk or future maltreatment and harm. And that kind of gives us a safety assessment. So used together, they really help to guide the decisions related to sort of what are the needs for ongoing DCFS services. But it's so that the caseworker is not the only person involved in the case, but they're using assessments, they're using team, they're determining what are the best supports and services that are really going to be necessary to kind of help strengthen that family. And then, as you strengthen the family, you reduce that potential for abuse and neglect.
Thank you.
Sure.
And just to be clear, so walk us through, the phone call is made, and then a social worker goes or makes a phone call or visits the home. Is that what happens first?
So what will happen is the referee will make the call, and if it's determined that there is enough information and meets the criteria for to take a case, we would take a case, or you'll sometimes hear it called a referral. And
then it's called an open case after that?
And then what we do is we actually, at that point in time, we're going to assign it to what we call a CPS worker or a Child Protective Services worker. But those are the ones that it will be an open CPS case is usually the lingo that will be used.
Yeah.
And then we'll go in and we'll start doing some of these assessments, and it involves a whole lot of different guidelines that we have to follow, which includes seeing the child within a certain time frame, depending on what the referral is, what the circumstances are that have been called in, and then interviewing the child, also interviewing the parents, the alleged perpetrator, home visits, just a variety of different things the guidelines that we need to follow and policies to sort of come to a determination of what have we got here, what are we dealing with. And sometimes what's interesting is the reason that you got pulled into the home may not end up being the services that you end up putting in the home, because you realize there's something else going on. Not like educators. You may start with a child coming to school falling asleep, and then you start realizing, it's more than just not getting sleep. It's A, B, and C, or different things like that. So
you might see a symptom and see the symptom, but not knowing exactly what the cause is.
And under DCFS, we have a whole bunch of different sort of kind of arenas. One of which is going to be CPS.
Yes.
Yeah. So CPS is going to be sort of that initial investigation and assessment.
Okay.
And they're going to decide, is there abuse or neglect, or does this family need some ongoing services? So again, all under DCFS, but there's a CPS. Then there's going to be permanency work, which could mean services in the home, which could mean temporarily removing the child. And by the way, if we do have to remove a child temporarily from a home, we always want to look to our relatives, or what we refer to as kin or kinship, to try to sort of maintain that family connection, that familiarity for the children. And we have another arm that's sort of adoption. We have domestic violence services. So there's kind of a few things, but it all comes under the umbrella of DCFS.
In the same umbrella. So you assess the child's environment, and then services are put into place. And then is there like, kind of at school, when we make a plan for a child, it's like you have this master plan, but you don't necessarily know exactly where it's going to go based on the progress. Is that fair to say? Is that kind of how it works under the umbrella of DCFS?
Yeah, kind of not unlike your I think you call it an individualized education plan.
Yes, IEP.
Yes. We refer to it as a child and family plan. And that's exactly it, is we look at, okay, what caused us to be involved? Why are we here? What are sort of the needs that need to be addressed? And sort of the how are we going to, what are we going to put in place? What are kind of going to be the objectives or the tasks, or how to kind of get the family to, from point A to B? And then, how are we going to measure that success as well? What's that going to look like, and who's going to be involved? And that's why that's where you'll see the child and family team I talked about sort of being brought together, which will be your informal supports, friends, family, maybe clergy or, anything like that. And then some more of the formal supports, which might be a therapist, a teacher, different things like that to kind of come together to sort of support and wrap around the family to help them to work on those things that need to be in place for the kids to be safe and to remain in the home.
What kind of hope can you offer about, everyone just it's about being educated, and some people didn't grow up in a home where they were able to learn those skills. So what hope can you offer for that?
Exactly. No, and I think that you hit that on the head. I don't believe that there are many people that wake up in the morning and say, I think I'm going to abuse a child today.
Right.
It is that lack of education, that lack of opportunity, or other difficulties that do get in the way sometimes of parenting. And one thing in particular, and I'm sure you see this as well as an educator, is that when parents are um, busy battling other issues, whether that's how to pay my rent, how to get food on the table, perhaps it is some drug abuse, it makes it really hard for them to sometimes cover some of the basics. And I think another important piece is not being judgmental.
Mhm.
We never know how people got where they're at.
Yeah.
And more than likely, that's not where they thought they would be either. And so I think being open and not judgmental so that people can come to you and they feel like, you know, maybe this is someone who can offer me some support or resources. I think that's another very important thing because DCFS, we're the child welfare entity or agency. That is true. But child welfare is actually belongs to the community. I mean,
Yeah.
there's prevention, there's, resources to provide to people. And so I think being familiar with resources that are in your community or maybe even in your very own school so that you can provide those to the families who might need help.
Everything that you're saying is so important, and we all play a role in this.
Absolutely.
I love that
Absolutely.
quote that we're all just here walking each other home.
Hmm.
Like,
Yeah.
it takes a
Isn't that the
team, it
truth?
takes a village. My family growing up, we took in foster babies when I was young, and it was
Did
a
you
delightful
really?
experience.
Wow.
And my mom named them starting with the alphabet. So the first child name started with an A and B, and we got all the way to G by the time I was in third grade or something.
Yeah.
And it was a beautiful experience, and I always had good memories of that. And then when we moved, that was in Idaho. And
That
then when
is
our
so
family moved to
amazing.
Utah, but then when I had a family, I wanted to be a part of that. And so we took in some babies. We were just shelter care. So
Wow.
there are, so that I
Mhm.
want other people to know that you don't have to completely sign up to be a foster home, meaning that you're in it for the complete long haul. We were shelter care, and that is what it was called, something different when we did it growing up. But
Yeah. Yeah.
shelter care is the time that maybe for us, it was babies that had drugs in their system. And
Mhm.
so we picked them up from the hospital and we would have shelter care. We would take care of them until they were
It's
placed in.
incredible.
And it was really good for my own kids to see that,
Mhm.
wow, they'd ask questions. Why can't these parents take care of their baby? My point is that there are different ways that you can help. If someone out there listening is in a station of
Absolutely.
life where you thought, oh, I have to be fostered to adopt, you can do shelter care. It is very.
Yes, there are lots of ways to help. Absolutely.
What can the general public do to better support this division of family services?
But in terms of really like what can the general public do besides reporting it? I think it's just being that support and being familiar with things, with those resources and looking for opportunities to sort of help before it becomes an issue. If you see a family struggling, saying to yourself, how can I help? Or how could I intervene? Or, could I send them, to the food bank? Or do we need to sign a child up for a free lunch or just different things? Because if we could prevent it and put me and our division out of a job, what a great way to go, you know?
It's a good point.
Um, and so I think just being aware and offering support.
Thank you. That's so beautiful. I hear what you're saying in just lightening the load of
Yeah,
families, some of the stresses
absolutely.
that other people have that we might not have and might not be able to relate to, but that
Right.
added stress is something that causes perhaps some poor decision making. There are resources. If you are a person that is struggling in your family and you don't have the skills, you don't have to live that way, and you can find these resources and get help. And so don't wait for it to be reported. Say, I need help. Am I right about that, Charri? What do you think?
I do think it's important to be able to ask for help, and sometimes that's easier said than done.
Yes.
Sometimes there are people who are concerned about, how will this look, or will people think I'm a terrible person, or whatever reasons that it's difficult for people to ask for help. And I think that's why it's important for the rest of us to, again, not judge people, because any one of us could end up in a situation where we're one paycheck away from homelessness, or we're one stressor away from some. We're all human,
Yeah.
and we all have needs, and we all need help. And part of it, if we have the wherewithal to be able to recognize that we need help and to be able to ask for it, the flip side of that is the person that we're asking will be there to actually offer some of those resources or some of that support. So it's kind of a two-way street.
It's true. Well, I hear your compassion, I hear your wisdom, and I thank you for this interview. It's really valuable what you have shared with us today.
Well, I just appreciate it so much. And you and I talked a little bit, before we started, and I would love it if you would let the educators know how much we appreciate them. They are such an important part of our team when we are working with children, and we recognize that, and recognize that you don't always get all the kudos that maybe are deserved. And so thank you for serving our kids and being part of that team, because it is definitely uh, a uh, a situation that requires lots of support from lots of places.
Thank you. And I say the same to you. Thank you for what you're doing and how you're protecting children and strengthening families. The whole premise of why I started this podcast was one mantra, and that is, when we strengthen a child, we strengthen society. But I want to add to that
That
today.
is true.
When we strengthen parents, we strengthen society. When we strengthen a family, we strengthen
Yes.
society.
Thanks for being part of today's class. To submit a question or topic for further episodes, please email elementary.schooled@outlook.com. School is out for today, but please remember, when we strengthen a child, we strengthen society.